This is a true story about Japan's most famous prison escape artist. Using just a wire, a nail, and a bowl of soup, he escaped multiple times and even reduced his death sentence to 20 years in prison. The story takes place in Aomori, Japan, in 1931. A man named Shiratori Yoshie and his partner were caught stealing. During the struggle with the homeowner, they accidentally killed him. After that, they went on the run for 2 years. In 1935, Shiratori saw in the newspaper that his partner had been arrested. Loyal to his friend, he didn't want him to take all the blame, so he turned himself in. However, prison guards treated him terribly. He was beaten and tortured daily. Unable to bear it, he planned his escape. On an early morning in 1936, at 5:30 a.m., he used a metal wire he had secretly taken from a bath bucket to unlock his handcuffs and the cell door. He climbed to the roof and escaped. When the guard checked his cell at 5:45 a.m., he thought Shiratori was still in bed, but it was just a pillow under the blanket. The truth was only discovered the next morning, but by then, Shiratori was long gone. Unfortunately, his freedom lasted only 3 days. Without survival skills or a clear plan, he was quickly captured again. Because of his escape attempt, his 15-year sentence was increased to life in prison. 6 years later, during World War II, many prisoners were relocated. Shiratori was transferred to Akita prison, where conditions were even worse. Guards, knowing his escape history, made sure he was constantly beaten and forced to do hard labor. To prevent another escape, they placed him in a special cell with iron doors. A small skylight on the ceiling was the only source of light. The walls were covered in smooth copper to stop him from climbing. He was forced to sleep on the cold floor in handcuffs without a mattress or blanket. Despite this, one guard, Captain Kobayashi, treated him kindly. He never hit him and often checked on him. This was the only guard Shiratori respected. On the stormy night of June 15th, 1943, a guard doing rounds found Shiratori missing. His handcuffs were left behind, and the skylight was open. He had managed to open his handcuffs and used his palms and feet to slowly climb up the smooth copper walls. To increase grip, he scratched the skin off his hands and feet with a nail. He had also secretly loosened the wooden skylight over time. Finally, he waited for a stormy night so the rain and thunder would cover the noise as he pushed it open. He escaped again. 3 months later, on September 18th, Captain Kobayashi was at home when he heard a knock on his door. To his surprise, it was Shiratori. He explained that he had escaped because of the guards' brutal treatment. Kobayashi was the only person he trusted. He had a plan. He wanted to turn himself in and expose the cruelty of Japan's prison system in court to help improve conditions for inmates. Kobayashi hesitated, then invited Shiratori inside and gave him food and water. However, a few minutes later, while Shiratori wasn't looking, Kobayashi went to the bathroom and secretly called the police. Shiratori was arrested again, and his plan was ruined. This time, he swore never to trust law enforcement again. His life sentence was extended by 3 years. Shiratori requested to be transferred to a warmer prison, as he couldn't bear the cold in northern Japan. But instead of granting his request, the judge sent him to the country's coldest prison, Abashiri Prison in northern Hokkaido. No one had ever escaped from there. Winter temperatures in his cell dropped below freezing. He was given only thin clothes, no blanket, and half the food portions of other prisons. His meals even froze into solid blocks. To prevent another escape, the prison took extra precautions. His window was made smaller and completely covered in metal. His new handcuffs were solid iron, weighed 20 kilograms, and had no keyholes. Even his feet were chained. He was not allowed to bathe, and he had to relieve himself inside the cell. The cruel treatment made his desire to escape even stronger. For 6 months, he carefully planned. Every day, he dripped soup onto the iron bolts of his window. The salt in the soup corroded the metal over time. By the time the bolts were loose, summer had arrived, so he wouldn't freeze to death. outside. The guards assumed the window was too small for him to pass through, but they didn't know he had a unique ability. He could dislocate his joints. He squeezed through and popped his joints back into place. Once again, he disappeared into the wilderness. Shiratori hid in the mountains for 2 years. In 1946, he finally returned to a village. But what he saw shocked him. American soldiers were everywhere. Japanese women held hands with them, and English signs filled the streets. Through a newspaper, he learned Japan had surrendered the previous year. Believing the American occupation meant a fairer legal system, he decided to stop running. He wanted to find his wife and daughter and start over. Unfortunately, while passing through a melon farm, villagers mistook him for a thief. A fight broke out, and he accidentally killed one of them. On December 15th, 1946, he was arrested again. This time, he was sentenced to death for murder and escaping prison. In 1947, he was sent to Sapporo prison to await execution. To prevent another escape, 6 armed guards watched him 24/7. His cell had no screws, bolts, or gaps. Even the windows were made in one solid piece. The guards were so confident, they didn't even put handcuffs on him. By now, Shiratori was 40 years old. His body was weaker, and his chances of escaping looked impossible. Guards noticed a strange behavior. He kept staring at the ceiling. Thinking he was just dreaming of escaping, they focused their attention on the skylight. What they didn't realize was that he was actually working on the floor. Shiratori had secretly hidden a metal scrap. He used a nail to sharpen it into a saw. Then he started cutting the wooden floor beneath his bed. At night, he placed the wooden plank under his blanket to make it look like he was sleeping. Meanwhile, he dug a hole under the floor using a bowl and spoon to remove the dirt. One morning, the guards came to wake him, but there was no response. When they lifted the blanket, he was gone. Shiratori had escaped for the 4th time. However, life on the run was difficult. In 1948, he sat on a roadside bench to rest. A police officer happened to sit next to him. The two started chatting, but Shiratori remained cautious. Suddenly, the officer offered him a cigarette. Shiratori froze. Cigarettes were a luxury in post-war Japan. After years of mistreatment by guards, this simple act of kindness moved him to tears. At that moment, he unconsciously revealed his real name. He was arrested again. However, this time the court ruled the previous murder was self-defense. Because he had never harmed any prison guards in his escapes, the judge reduced his sentence from death to 20 years. They also approved his request to be transferred to a warmer prison. From then on, guards treated him better, and he never attempted to escape again.